Hey, folks, good to be here with you again for Pastor Troy's Unstoppable Leadership Moments. There's some situations that you come into as a pastor for any length of time. And, I got a lot of great relationships across denominational lines. I'm an ordained minister with the Church of God out of Cleveland, but, I go and preach and have relationships with people in other Pentecostal denominations, obviously, Assembly of God, Foursquare, Pentecostal Church of God, but also I preached revivals in Baptist churches and evangelical churches alike. As a result of that, building a relationship over the years, I get a lot of phone calls and messages and conversations with pastors in various places, and I keep hearing something repeated over and over again, and it's just the issue of kind of, I'm going to call it the enemy of access. What happens is when people have access to your life, it really creates some issues you have to be dealing with on a regular basis. And so I just want to talk about that just for a few minutes during this episode of Unstoppable Leadership. And there's a statement that I've made over the years, and it's whatever you give access to gains influence, and whatever has influence is going to create action. Folks, listen, access is never neutral. It's not just the thing that people have and it won't produce something. It's going to produce something. And so whatever you allow close enough to your heart, your mind, your family, your ministry, or your calling, it's eventually going to shape your thoughts. It's going to affect your emotions. It's going to influence decisions you make. That's why it's such a powerful thing, and that's why it's also such a dangerous thing. I remember years ago when I first started coming up, senior minister says, you know what, you just don't get close to people, because you get close to people, then you can't correct them, or you get close to people, it undermines the relationship. Well, I don't believe that, because I didn't see that as the pattern that Jesus has established in his word. Now, granted, yeah, there's danger in that, but access provides an opportunity, I believe, for us to really touch people's lives and really imprint people's lives for the kingdom. But here's what happens. A lot of people will seek access, but not everyone's going to seek that access to you for the right reasons. Some people are genuinely going to seek it because they desire growth in their life. They desire accountability, an impartation, maybe, wisdom, even correction in the relationship, or spiritual development. But the problem is there's others that seek access because they perceive that there's going to be something beneficial in your life or your platform or your position or your influence, even your ministry connections or opportunities that are going to give them opportunities. And so they don't necessarily desire you. They desire what they believe proximity to you can produce for them. And so this is where leadership really becomes that two-edged sword. And so the burden of leadership is not simply just dealing with enemies on the outside. Often the greatest wounds in leadership come from those who were granted access to you on the inside. And what makes this especially difficult is that, many times these expectations are just silently created in the mind of the person who's seeking access. Those expectations were never the product of a promise that was made. They were the product of presumptions that were formed. And so that individual may begin to imagine, what opportunities they'll receive, what doors that relationship will open for them, maybe what recognition they'll gain or what role they'll have, or, what advantages ultimately that proximity is going to produce. And when those imagined expectations are unmet, disappointment often seeks a scapegoat. They look for somebody else to blame. They're not self-aware enough to just acknowledge, listen, I created some expectations that were never promised. And so many instead, like I said, they're looking for an accusation to justify that offense. And so suddenly that same leader that they sought access to, he becomes uncaring, or she becomes uncaring, unfair. They become controlling, unappreciative, manipulative, distant, selfish, shortly they just become the problem. And so not because there's any actual wrongdoing, but because the individual confused access with entitlement. Folks, listen, access does not equal ownership. Access does not guarantee promotion. Access does not obligate the person to give you preferential treatment. Access is an opportunity. It's not a contract. And so that's why immature people can really sometimes become very dangerous people. And so many of the most people that are desperate for access are oftentimes the least developed spiritually, emotionally, intellectually. And that's why they're looking for access to someone else, especially leadership. They've not yet learned, how to process disappointment. They've not learned how to deal with correction or delayed expectations or some unmet desire in a healthy and mature way. And, Proverbs warns repeatedly about the instability of the immature soul. And it's that undeveloped heart that often turns admiration into accusation the moment the expectations collide with reality. And think about this. Jesus experienced the same thing, leaders. He gave access to Judas. Now think about that for a second. Jesus knew that Judas would betray him, yet he still allowed him to walk amongst the 12. He gave him the same teaching, the same witness, the same miracles. He ate at the same table. He participated in the same ministry. In other words, he experienced the exact same things that the 11 did. Why? Because Jesus understood something powerful, that the reward of giving access to the right people outweighs the risk of betrayal by the wrong people. All of those guys experienced the exact same thing, but one walked away saying, listen, it wasn't right for me, or something was wrong, or betrayal set in. Does that mean that person was right? No, that just means that person had the wrong perception. And so had Jesus just simply closed himself off completely to Judas, then Peter, John, and the others would have been shut out too. And so this is, I believe, where a lot of leaders get wounded, after betrayal, after disappointment, criticism, manipulation, or some type of relational damage. The temptation is to just build walls that are so high around you that nobody can get near you again. But if we allow hurt to harden our hearts, what'll happen is we'll eventually deny access not to harmful people, but we'll delay or prevent access to hungry people. And so what we'll end up doing is we'll block those who really deeply appreciate us, those who desperately need our guidance, who generally desire to be discipled, or those that would become faithful laborers in the kingdom. Consider John 6:6, thinking about it. It says about Jesus, it says, from that time forward, many of the disciples went back and walked with him no more. So what did Jesus do wrong? Nothing. He didn't chase them, though. He didn't manipulate them into staying. He didn't abandon his mission because people walked away. What he did is he understood that access always carries risk. Some people are going to misunderstand you. Some are going to misrepresent you. Some are going to misuse that proximity or that access. Some are going to turn away disappointed because you didn't fulfill an expectation that somehow they secretly created in that relationship. But listen, that can't stop us from loving people. That can't stop us from discipling people. That can't stop us from opening our lives to people. Leadership requires discernment, but it also requires courage. And so what we've got to do is we've got to guard our hearts without hardening our heart. And so there's a difference between, I believe, discernment and isolation. Isolation is what you could call wounded discernment, and it becomes fear-driven at that point. And so the enemy would love nothing more than to convince leaders that, hey, listen, don't trust anybody, don't help anybody, don't open your life up again, don't give access to anyone again. But see, if the enemy can cut off access, what he does, he cuts off your influence. And if he can cut off your influence, what he does, he can hinder the kingdom and multiplication in the kingdom. And so the answer, folks, is not to stop granting access. The answer is to steward access wisely and understand the risks that are associated with it. Jesus still washed the feet of the one that he was going to be betrayed by. And, he knew it. And so that heart's still true in the kingdom today. It's not naivety, it's not foolishness, it's not blindness, but it's a willingness to continue loving, leading, serving, and discipling people despite the risk attached to access. Because somewhere beyond Judas, folks, there's a John. And, beyond the quitter is a faithful disciple. Beyond the critic is a kingdom laborer just waiting for someone willing to open that door for them to have access. So don't allow the pain of misplaced access to cause you to shut out those who God desires to bring near to you. Guard your heart, use discernment, set healthy boundaries, never lose your willingness to pour into people, even people that might ultimately hurt you, because whatever you give access to, once again, gains influence, and whatever has influence is going to create an action. And so may we carry that influence, and may we do so loving God, loving people, regardless of the outcome. Once again, Pastor Troy here for just this moment in leadership, unstoppable. Keep it up, keep pouring in, keep pressing on. God bless you.